Hi, I'm Josh Bassages, Director and CEO of the Royal Ontario Museum. Welcome to this special online presentation of our signature lecture series, ROM Speaks. As we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional ancestral lands of the Wendat, the Anishinaabeg Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation since time immemorial to today. From fascinating viewpoints to thought-provoking insights, ROM Speaks presents the brightest minds and most compelling voices on ideas that matter across art, culture, and nature. Please enjoy this essential new addition to our ROM at Home digital programming. And I look forward to welcoming you back to the museum for more programs like this when it is safe to do so.
The name of the exhibit is Transforming Fashion, and could be more apt. In myself, I always sneak into fashion exhibits at museums, and I kind of, overhear what people are talking about, and usually say, "Well, I wouldn't wear that." Would you wear that? No, I wouldn't wear that. And this question of wearability is. It is a central question, but it's not the only question, and without designers like Iris, fashion would just be apparel. If we were only concerned with wearability, we'd be wearing apparel and we wouldn't be wearing fashion. And I would even go as far as to say that Iris's work, in my opinion, transcends fashion. It takes it to another plane. And without Iris, fashion would have been a much more impoverished discipline today, because Iris wasn't always thinking to become a fashion designer, right? So how did that happen?
When I was a lot younger, I used to dance a lot, and dance is still a big love in my life, but I'm not practicing it anymore. But I had moments where I was thinking of, wanting to become a dancer, but somewhere along the way, it transcended into a bigger passion, and that was fashion. And I think for me, fashion is very related to dance, and it's very related to art as well. And I think for me, it's really the place where I can combine both fascinations.
Do you ever feel limited in your métier because there is only so much you can express with the tools that you have?
Yeah, I definitely feel limited, but I think exactly that feeling is a reason to move forward. If I could do anything that I had in mind, then I don't know. Then what to do? I think there's many things that I cannot do today that I might be able to do in a few years, and I think that's what really keeps me going. Yeah.
And it's one of the topics I always think about, and actually that's where my deep respect for designers come from, because actually your toolbox is fairly limited as compared to an artist or a poet or a writer who have means of expression that go quite direct to their audience, as opposed to having scissors and fabric at your disposal. I wanted to talk about the ethos of your work, and I know we've talked about it, and you said you view your work as modern couture. Could you tell us more about this concept?
I think my work very much relates to craftsmanship. That's very much the base of it. And to me, craftsmanship is directly linked to innovation. I think craftsmanship has always been about innovation, and I think that's what I'm really trying to explore in my work, the combination between traditional knowledge, traditional craft, and tools that became available today, like 3D printing or laser cutting or 3D molding, all kinds of techniques that couldn't be possible before, but by combining it with modern or traditional craftsmanship, I really can make things that I have in my mind that I otherwise couldn't make.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In a way, couture, like haute couture, has this old-fashioned, outdated image, and I think like movies like Phantom Thread maybe hasn't helped in that regard. Actually, you have that image that there's these seamstresses that are like old and expert, and they come in every day, and there's a master ruling over them, usually male, and they're just making evening gowns and cocktail dresses all day long.
Well, my atelier looks very different. Yeah.
Yeah, there's because you have laser cutting machines in your atelier, and
All the machinery is outside of the atelier, so the atelier is focused on craftsmanship. But it's a big variety of craftsmanship. Yeah. It's all different techniques. Yeah.
So the atelier is where the final assembly. Atelier is where the final assembly happens.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of material development also is done outside.
Done outside. Yeah. There are also, I think, a couple of misconceptions about your work that I think we should maybe clear up. And I know we've spoken about it, where the media constantly refers to your work as futuristic or as something like out of a science fiction realm. And I think, the idea is to say is like, this is not coming from some galaxy far away, then there's the science element, but there's no fiction in it, right? So, could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I mean, everything that I make is here and now. I definitely get inspired by the impossibilities and the invisibilities around me. But nothing that I make is impossible. So I connect it much more to today than to the future. I do understand why people see sort of the future in it, because it's something often that they haven't seen before. But I hope it can inspire them also to think of today as a different world.
Yeah. And since we're at ROM, I think it's very fitting that so much of your work is inspired by nature. Could you tell us more about that?
Yeah. Nature is always coming back in every collection in different forms. I think especially the transformation within nature is something that really draws me. A lot of materials from nature that I would never be able to transcend into a dress do keep me from dreaming about doing it. Like water, it might come by, but I've made a few pieces that are literally inspired by water. And there's many other materials that come back like that. So movement and transformation is really what draws me from nature.
Yeah. And also, the transformation, right? And what I find awe-inspiring is how you make the abstract into the concrete, and you make the invisible visible. And it does take a certain leap of faith on the part of the viewer to understand it. And you've done collection based on synesthesia or refinery smoke, things that are like that are really very abstract, and how do you transform them into something concrete?
That is, funnily enough, quite an abstract process. Yeah, how does that happen? I think it's quite intuitive and almost unconscious. My process is really one of trial and error. Before I start on a collection, I have no idea where it will end. And that's also how I want to keep it, because the surprise factor in the process really makes or creates the value of the process. And of course, for the audience, it's different. But for me personally, the process is more important than the outcome.
Yeah.
It's really the process of discovery that keeps me going. So when I start on a collection, it's often really the material development that I start off without any concept yet, because I want to keep it open. And along that way of trying new techniques and trying new materials, the concept sort of, comes to me naturally. I also don't really do drawings. I want to moulage on a mannequin with the materials that I have. So the process is quite intuitive, and I think there's a meditative approach to the whole design process, and I think that's an important part for me to keep that.
So material research will often drive the process. But there are also, the inspirations. I'll reveal a secret once in a while. Before the show, I'll get an email from Iris with the inspiration.
Don't reveal anything
And
now.
not for the next show. And I'm really just floored. Where do these ideas come from? Because it's also an education for myself. How much time do you spend researching themes?
That's a continuous thing. It's not something that I do for a collection. That's just my life, I guess. It's a continuous hunt for new knowledge that often comes from people that I work with. Like Philip Beasley, that is part of the exhibition, and other people that I collaborate with are really important people for me to get inspired by and to get a different view towards everything around me.
I'd like to talk a little bit about the actual process. The construction and also some of the materials, and maybe we can give some concrete examples. And I remember another fashion exhibit at the Met, Manos Ex Machina, where the theme was highlighting the machine-made and the man-made nature of making clothes, because at the end of the day, all clothes are made by machines and by humans, or humans operating machines. And I think it was not coincidental that there were more of your garments featured than from any other designers, if I remember correctly. And I remember thinking that there is a reason for that. And can you tell us more about how you use both machines and handwork?
For me it's such a natural process to combine every tool that I feel inspired by. Obviously my hands were the starting point, that were my first tools, and then other people's hands started helping me. So definitely all the first collection it was only handwork. And then I started looking around me to other disciplines like architecture and art, and I was seeing that the artists that were inspiring me were also using different tools like the 3D printing or cutting. And my work is very much about three-dimensionality, that you will see in the exhibition as well. Every texture is layered and is three-dimensional, so some of the new techniques could really help the handwork. It's not about replacing them, but the knowledge from the handwork actually really helps me to also construct the more technological pieces, and the other way around. So I just added more tools to the process, and it's one big mix. And if you now look at the recent collections, in some dresses there are so many different techniques involved that I don't even separate them anymore. It's very natural for me to blend.
And of course, we in speaking with technologies and materials in your work, we cannot get away from 3D printing, and I think partly maybe the media is to blame for that, because 3D printing was such a hot topic for some years, and you were really a pioneer in using 3D printing in your work, and so it's kind of became known for a while. Designer Iris van Herpen does 3D printing.
Even worse, some people think that I only 3D print.
Yeah, so let's
No, really.
let's talk about 3D printing briefly, because it is a feature, and maybe you can tell us how first it came to you that you could use 3D printing for fashion, and who did you reach out to? How did the whole thing come about? Who were your first collaborators in that?
Yeah. It actually came out of I think the first 3D print came out of a failure. I was working with two architects in the Netherlands that designed a museum, and they asked me to design a dress inspired by their building. And the building really looked like a big bathtub. And so I wanted to create the water for them, like the water dress. That's where the idea came from. But it was so abstract that I had no idea how to start on the dress, like how to make it, because I had it quite clearly in my mind. And that's why I started reaching out to the people that were doing the 3D printing, because somehow I had in mind that maybe they could help me realizing this completely transparent dress. At the time, the transparent 3D printing wasn't possible, so I ended up making the dress by hand anyway. But it was the first sort of spark into the world of 3D printing. So I reached out to an architect called Daniel Wietrich from London. I did my first sketch because I wasn't really sketching at the time, but I had to if I wanted to work with 3D printing. So it even changed my process. And then he started helping me with 3D modeling, and we did the first 3D print. It was really an experiment. I didn't really believe that it would go anywhere, because it was really a technique that was only used in architecture. But I wanted to try it anyway, and it turned out very interesting. Like the layering and the three-dimensionality was there. Of course, there were other things missing, like there was no movability too much. The file making could. This is actually on the right side.
That's the first one, right?
That's the first one, and the water dress is actually accidentally next to it.
Yeah.
So the right piece came out of the impossibility of the left piece. But that's also a good example on how craftsmanship inspires technology and the other way around.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the water dress, because it's such a phenomenal example of you breaking an expected stereotype, right? Because everyone thinks that it was a 3D printed dress, where in fact, what happened? And how did you make this dress? And how long did it take you?
Yeah, well, the first one took a long time. I started experimenting with different acrylics, like transparent ones, and I started heating them up with hot air guns. So it was quite a simple process. I would heat it up and then mold it with metal pliers. But each time you had to wait for a long time before it turns into its shape. So yeah, it was, well, I don't remember how long the first one took, but I think a few weeks, because I had to get to know the technique. And I then did it again with Nick Knight and Daphne Guinness on Show Studio to show other people the technique. And then I was able to do it in 6 days. So that was a big improvement.
Yeah. So, you can try this at home and see how far it gets you. And I invite you to go to showstudio.com and look for the splash dress, it's called. And it's a project Iris did with Daphne Guinness and Nick Knight. And there's a fantastic video of Iris molding the dress really with just a hot scissors, hot air gun, and a pair of pliers.
Yeah.
And
I think it's the only real video of a process.
Yeah.
Because I really, it's quite a holy process for me.
Yeah.
The actual moment of creation. So it was quite a rare.
I think it's just such a nice way to break stereotypes that, you know, here it's just you and your hands and your brain, you know,
Yeah.
working together and making something without any other involvement.
Yeah.
And of course, besides 3D printing, and by now, you know, you've done so much in terms of techniques, but perhaps you can highlight something for us, one or two techniques that you found particularly interesting or challenging or inspiring that you do it over and over again.
One technique that was really a surprise for me was the technique that we used for wilderness. I was collaborating with an artist called Jolan van der Wiel. He's also in Amsterdam, like I am, and he uses magnets to grow textures. If it comes by, I'll show you. The process is like a two-component silicon where we put metal powder inside and then use magnets to grow the texture. There's the moon dress that is made from the technique in the exhibition as well. And normally when I work on a dress, the process grows day by day, and it takes many weeks, sometimes even months, to see the steps of how it's being made. But this particular process really, it grew, so to say, in several seconds, and it was sort of a nice non-controllable technique for me, because I had control in the shape, but I didn't really have control in the texture. So in that sense, I really felt like I was collaborating with nature. Like I often go against nature.
Yeah.
I try to manipulate as much as possible, but here I really let part of my control go, and that felt quite refreshing for me.
Yeah.
I think it was the same with the water dress. Once I was heating up one area, another area would deform again. So I could never really finish the dress because it was always evolving on its own.
Yeah.
And I think that's sort of the fight, but the dance with the material is really inspiring. And that's again where we come back to where the process is sometimes more important than the outcome.
Do you ever get frustrated that you're not completely in control?
All the time. I think that's the biggest part of my life. Yeah.
But in a way, maybe it's exciting that, you know, you say one thing and nature says, physics says, nope,
physics says
sorry.
No.
And and by the way, I think when you go upstairs, I think there's a part of the magnetic dress that you can actually touch and feel the texture.
Yeah,
and,
there's different techniques that you can touch.
Yeah. One of the really beautiful things I saw as I was watching videos from your atelier is one of the dresses that your team was making. There were looked like hundreds, if not thousands, these silicone shells that they were filling manually with. It was like black ink or black silicone. What was that like, and how did that come about?
That was the Between the Lines collection. I'm thinking which material it was. I think it was a transparent PU that we made molds with vacuum forming, and then we were molding sort of three-dimensional textures and creating the color with injecting ink. It was one of those processes. Again, it was the first time that we were doing it, so having a deadline like a show in Paris is quite full on when you're doing that.
Sure.
So we had a lot of errors in that process. But it was very nice to work on it because we could really create looks that were seamless. Sometimes I really use the construction of a garment, like you use the seams as being part of the design, but this was really about the opposite. This was really about creating seamlessness around the body and the transparency. Yeah.
Since we have the shows going on the screen, yeah, I'd like to like switch gears a little bit and to talk about the shows. And for me personally, sometimes you hear people say, "Well, there's no more need for shows. You can just shoot a lookbook," or because the information is so readily available. And what does a show mean for you? You get to do it twice a year. What does that mean for you?
For me, with a show, everything comes together. It's really a moment where the garments come to life, and I think it's also an important moment to show what's behind the clothes. So for me, it's not only about presenting a one way, but also presenting a collaboration that has been an inspiration to me, that was part of the process, really to give people the experience of my own experience while making the collection. So many shows involve a collaboration with an artist, like by Privacy that you just saw. It's important for me to give people that same feeling as I have with the process, and I can do that in words afterwards in a press release, but it's different. I just want people to feel the work. So the performance aspect is really important.
Yeah. The show that we just saw before this was Biopiracy, and could you tell us a bit how it came together? The installation with the models, hanging suspended in plastic with breathing tubes, and how did all of that come about?
The installation is made by an artist called Lawrence Malstoff. And I saw his work and I was really inspired by it, because it really, I actually after the show I went in myself as well. Strangely enough, it is it's a nice feeling. It's really like going back in the womb or something. But he really made it for a meditative experience. But in the show, it's also relating to the concept of biopiracy and the idea, or it's more the question like, are we the owners of our own body, and till where are we the owners, and where do we become a product? And I think the installation really showed that from two different aspects.
Another show I wanted to ask you about was Voltage, and it's the first show that I attended, and I think again the idea was there. For me, what I was really impressed with, again, for how you take such an abstract concept like voltage and visualize it in dress, really. Do you remember how that show came about?
Yeah, again, voltage, I was inspired by an artist called Carlos van Kamp. He's an experimentalist with electricity. And it came by earlier, I saw, but we had a dancer during the show that was on top of a Tesla coil, and she could really dance with the electricity and decide the shape and the movement of it. And as a dancer, I always have been fascinated by movement and the transformation of the body, and the relationship between our inside and our outside, and the relationship between our environment, like the space just around us. And I think voltage captured all those
Yeah.
interests. And yeah, it was really about showing the energy of the body, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the show we're watching right now, Reform, right? That happened recently, and that was your 10-year anniversary, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And could you tell us about the band that's playing, how the music interacted with the clothes, and how it all came together?
Yeah, this is Airy Form. There were 5 musicians playing underwater. They are called Between Music. And they practiced for, yeah, it's unfortunately that you don't hear the music now, but they practiced for over 10 years to develop their own technique for making instruments that actually make sound underwater and also to sing underwater. It's really magical that they could actually sing underwater, but they were doing that. So all the music that was performed underwater, the audience was hearing, and they were really pushing their own bodies beyond the possible, and that's something that has been fascinating for me already from my dance background, but also with a lot of other artists that I work with. I think they all push their own boundaries in their own ways, and these people were, for me, really creating an emotional experience. It was really special to hear, and it's quite abstract, but I tried to translate the feeling that I got from their work, and it was also very relating to my own work, as I'm trying to push my own boundaries in my own processes. And they were also collaborating a lot with scientists and other people to make their performance happen. So it just all came together, and the collection was really inspired by the aspect of water and air and the absence of
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Well, I think this brings us neatly to another topic that I want to discuss is the collaborative nature of your work, and it's really crucial, isn't it, for you to collaborate with others. Could you tell us more about that? And how do you approach these people? How do you knock on their door and say, I'm a fashion designer. I want to work with you.
Well, it that happens quite organically. It's like meeting friends. You meet someone or you see someone's work, or it's the other way around. People get inspired and they approach me. That's quite a natural process. I'm not looking for collaboration, and it's also not always happening, but it is a big part of my work, and it's very blend also with the inspiration part. Sometimes an artist or a scientist or an architect can give me a lot of inspiration, but I don't necessarily have to collaborate. That's only when there is really sort of a special friendship that is growing that sometimes comes out, but it's not something that is really forced or looked for. No.
Have you ever been turned down?
Yeah, definitely, because I'm very much in time frames. Like fashion is such an industry that is, based on time, and I'm doing a show every 6 months. And other disciplines are having completely different time frames. So.
Sure.
But sometimes we work on material developments that do take longer or much longer than a collection, and then I just try to move it forward.
Yeah. And on the flip side, have you ever been pleasantly surprised when you reached out to someone and they would say, "Oh yeah, we know your work. We would love to work with you."
Yeah, that also happens. Yeah.
And you've collaborated obviously with artists. Dance is a huge part of collaborative process, and that's, you kind of expect that. But when you come to architects and scientists, how how do you gain their respect? Because fashion is often considered so frivolous and unserious by people in those disciplines. How do you get through to them?
Well, I'm not trying to do that. Either someone sees something in my work that sparks them and inspires them to see fashion as something more than clothes. I see fashion really as a form of art, and some other people do as well, but you have to have that naturally. I'm not gonna try to convince someone about something that they haven't seen yet. It's something that you have to experience, and I think people that normally are not necessarily looking at fashion or get inspiration from it, they sometimes see a different discipline in my work, and they see the connection between other worlds, and I think that's where, it transcends the normal idea of being a garment, and I think that's where also a lot of connection happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that, we touched upon it, but that transcendence, I do think that's what drives a lot of people to say, oh, this is not what we expected.
Completely.
It challenges people to think about fashion in different ways.
Yeah.
And you were the first fashion designer to visit CERN in Switzerland, and I'm sure that was a first. And for those of you who don't know, CERN is an enormous science physics facility in Europe. And so tell us how that came about.
The first time I went there with Philip Easley, the architect that I collaborate with, and another friend, to really get to know the place, to get inspiration, and to just talk with people about what they are searching for. And really, I think art can give you a different perspective on life, and I think science does the same. So again, it's a really abstract translation into a garment, but for me, the more abstract, I guess, the better. It's just, again, the conversations that I had there with people that, that I felt like translating into my work.
Yeah. And this multidisciplinary or cross-disciplinary approach, do you feel it's important? It certainly feels important for me. And I came to fashion myself from being a music fan, and I think when fashion speaks to other disciplines, instead of being in this kind of a bubble, maybe that's when fashion is at its best. And is it important for you to have this multidisciplinary approach?
Yeah, I don't think I could really find enough inspiration from fashion only. I mean, of course, I get inspiration from fashion, but I really need to look at other worlds to fulfill my my sort of weirdest dreams. I really need to look at other disciplines and to find new ways of looking at my own work, and the collaborations really help with that. And I think it's important for fashion as well, because the bubble is so closed that I think knowledge is just not translating enough. And I think fashion could really move a lot more or a lot quicker forward if it would collaborate more.
Yeah. And one of the most lasting collaborations have been with Philip Beasley, with the architect, who's here today. And would it be fair to say that you're the son of Toronto? And is that a fair assessment? But there is something. Could you tell us how that came about and what drew to you to the work of Philip Beasley? And personally, I think it's wonderful to see now finally his work set next to yours, and it's sort of a culmination in a way of your ongoing collaboration.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw Philip, his work many years ago, and I felt so inspired that I didn't know what to do. His work is just extraordinary, and the way he also transcends his own discipline of architecture into complete new worlds, I think is undone. And I made a collection called Hybrid Holism, inspired by his work. And after that collection, we started to meet each other and starting conversations about fashion and architecture and everything in between, and starting to talk about textures and talking about materiality. And till that moment, I never had collaborated in a way that I have done with Philip. I worked with architects, but they would make my files. So it's much more of a practical collaboration. But with Philip, there was so much communal inspiration and fascination that we really started collaborating on a much more personal level, on a creative level. And yeah, that really changed also my own way of seeing collaboration. Before, I saw it more as a practical thing, like I need something, and I can do that by collaborating with someone. But with Philip, it's much more on an inspirational level, and really being able to look at my own discipline in a really different light. So the conversations and the textile explorations really changed my work. And he has also been my longest collaborator. We work together now for, I think, 6 years, 5 or 6 years. And that's why I think it's really special that for the first time our works are exhibited in a museum together. And I really want to thank the ROM for that. It's really special.
Yeah. So these are all collaborations before creation. You know, I want to talk a little bit, ask you a little bit about now the final product and the people who are inspired by the final product. And as it's been mentioned, you know, your designs feature on stage, worn by musicians, in films, and you know, I know that Bjork is a big fan of your work. You know, could you tell us a little bit more about that side? You know, is it gratifying for you to see that these creators gravitate to your work?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, people like Björk or other people that I work with, they all have their own identity and their own sort of world that they've created. And when I can make something for them, it really changes my work. It takes a different identity than that I would have envisioned when I was first making it. Even when I designed something for someone specifically, it always surprises me when someone is actually wearing it and experiencing it. And that surprise is really, I think, one of the biggest joys in my work. And yeah, that are special moments that I really.
This is Bjork wearing Iris van Herpen at DJing at Iris's 10-year anniversary party. Yeah. Which brings us back to wearability. It can be worn, and it's wonderful that it can, such forward-thinking clothes. So we're going to wrap up, and thank you so much, Iris.